We've started getting our first looks at the gameplay of Mario Kart World from sources such as IGN, Nintendo Life, and from Nintendo themselves. And based on what's been shown so far, I think it's fair to say that this is shaping up to be one of the most ambitious Mario Kart games ever. But ambition doesn't always translate to quality, and the more time I've spent with the footage, the more I'm starting to see little cracks start to form. Now, I'm still fully expecting this game to take over my life once it launches, but I do think that it's worth taking a step back and doing a deeper, more critical look at everything we've gotten so far. The good, the bad, and everything in between. So let's analyze the footage and talk about everything we actually know about Mario Kart World, starting with the items. Many of these are items that we've seen in previous iterations of the Mario Kart franchise, like red shells, blue shells, and bombs. The lightning item also returns, but it's been heavily nerfed. It still takes away everyone's items, but now, instead of keeping you small much longer if you're in a top spot, it keeps everyone small for just a couple of seconds. And it also doesn't hit anybody behind the person who actually used the lightning. I'm still not really sure how to feel about all that yet, but I've been saying for some time now that Shock is easily the most overpowered item in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and that it should either keep top spots small for longer, or it should remove everyone's items, but not both. Nintendo has apparently decided on option 2, so it'll be interesting to see how this actually plays out online. The other thing I noticed is that blue shells in Shock seem to be way less common in World than they are in 8 Deluxe. I think I counted a grand total of 2 lightnings and just a handful of blue shells across the 20 or so races that I watched, and so assuming these numbers hold up, I'm cautiously optimistic about this change, since one of my biggest complaints about 8 Deluxe is that you get punished so hard for being in first place that oftentimes the optimal play is to literally drive slower and let someone else take the lead. The only concern I have is whether they're swinging too far in the other direction, since about 90% of your time in Grand Prix and Knockout Tours is spent driving in a straight line, but we'll come back to that point a bit later on in the video. Still on the topic of items, some are technically new, but behave in a similar way to other items in the roulette. The hammer item, for example, launches 4 hammers in front of you in a straight line, and this seems to pretty much fill the same role as the boomerang flower. But that being said, we haven't seen anyone try and throw the hammers backward yet, so maybe it's got some different behavior there. We've also got both the fire flower and the ice flower in Mario Kart World, but again, based on the initial gameplay footage, they seem to do the same thing, just with a different coat of paint. The final category of items are brand new to the franchise and are honestly pretty interesting. The first and probably most intriguing item is a comic orb that, when used, turns all of the other racers into a different character. It's not clear whether the choice of character is based on who used the item or on something else, but this is apparently one way to unlock new racers on the character select screen, so pretty cool. Another item we haven't seen before is the golden shell. It's not really clear what this thing is supposed to do. What we can say is that it drops a bunch of coins in front of you, but it doesn't seem to go out of its way to hit anyone. So it's kinda weird, because personally I don't think I'd want to use an item if I knew that it was going to give everyone in front of me more coins, but again, maybe we just need to wait and get more details when the game launches in June. My overall thoughts on the item system is that it seems to be more of the same as what we've seen in previous games, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it does mean that the novelty wears off fairly quickly.
I know we're kind of just sitting and repeating the same stuff, but I want to see as much as possible right here.
It has to be done. We have to talk over the footage.
All right.
Them's the rules.
The last thing that I want to mention, though, is that I think the decision to make it so that items are automatically dragged behind you is a bad, or at the very least misguided one. I'm all for accessibility options, and honestly, smart steering and auto accelerate were a couple of main reasons why I bought 8 Deluxe in the first place, since these 2 features made it much easier to play with my kids. But they were just that, options. It might not sound like that big of a deal, but there are a lot of reasons that you might not want to be dragging your items behind you. Just for one example, in 8 Deluxe, if you're dragging an item and then you get hit by a blue shell, it destroys whatever you were holding, which leaves you vulnerable to a follow-up attack. In general, I'm just not really a fan of forced mechanics that take control away from the player like that, but again, we'll see how big of a deal this is when the game actually releases. Now, that's enough about the items. We all know that the main selling point of Mario Kart World is the world aspect of the game. For the first time ever, the tracks exist in a fully open environment. There's a free roam mode that lets you explore the world at your own pace, and it also seems like this is what you'll be doing when waiting for lobbies online, which is a feature that is just so much more engaging than sitting around staring at Miis for a while. Nintendo has been very tight-lipped about how all of that's going to work and what kinds of secrets there are to explore.
Yeah, look out in the distance there.
Whoa!
Yeah, that's really neat. And once again, there's more to free roam mode than we're talking about here, so please stay tuned for the dedicated Mario Kart Direct that's going to be coming up in a few weeks.
That Direct, by the way, will be happening on April 17th, so expect a follow-up video after that. Now, while we don't know a lot about what the world has in store for us, we do know quite a bit about the structure of that world. So far, there are a total of 29 places on the map where we can see tracks, and just as a minor correction, in my previous video I talked about Mario Circuits 1, 2, and 3 as being separate tracks, but it looks like they actually exist as a single track called Mario Circuit. And that reimagining of the retro tracks more as remasters in spirit than straight one-to-one remakes seems to be a theme.
There's retro tracks, but not in the sense that, hey, we plucked this from Mario Kart DS and we remade it here. It's we took this theme, this idea, this motif, and kind of just remixed it a little bit to fit this entirely new formula. They were all really, really good.
I think this is honestly a really cool change that makes a ton of sense. Historically, Nintendo's really tried to tackle their retros with a sense of, when these tracks were first released, they were limited by the hardware of the system they were released on. And since we no longer have those limitations, let's reimagine the track for the current generation with as much visual flair as possible. But the thing is that each new console is only ever going to give us diminishing returns as far as graphical fidelity is concerned, and so it just makes sense that rather than straight up port old tracks to new hardware, that Nintendo would really try to redesign the tracks from the ground up. And that's how you end up with a course like Mario Circuit, which seamlessly blends 3 different courses into one, much like what they did with the city tracks in 8 Deluxe. This is also how you get something like Wario Shipyard, which removes all of the underwater sections from its DS and 3DS counterparts and replaces them with wide open water sections with trickable waves and obstacles to avoid, and this is apparently one of the tracks that's going to be much more impacted by the weather. Dare I say that even Sky High Sunday looks like it might be fun to drive on now, which reminds me, I really need to check the temperature in hell to make sure it hasn't frozen over yet. And for the new courses, I already talked in my last video about how amazing they all look, and that opinion has only been reinforced by what we've seen in the gameplay footage. DK Spaceport, for example, seems to be a Mount Wario-esque sectional track that reminds me a lot of Excitebike Arena, except that instead of being a boring mess, you make your way up a series of straightaways with increasingly complex sets of obstacles inspired by the original Donkey Kong. And while I'm a bit worried that the track will turn out to be less interesting than it looks after the time trialers have gotten their hands on it, the fact that rail grinding and wall kicks both seem to give you mini turbo boost makes me confident that if anything it'll go the other way. So on the whole, I feel like what we've seen with the track so far is really promising, and that's why I'm honestly baffled as to why they designed Grand Prix and Knockout mode the way they did. Here's what we know about those. Grand Prix maintains its traditional 4-track structure from previous games, but how you navigate between tracks has completely changed. After completing a full race on the first track of the circuit, you start the next race already in motion and then drive from your current track to the next track. I think this is a really cool idea, but from the 2 cups that we've seen so far, it looks like these transitional roads between courses take up 2 full laps, meaning that you only get to race 1 lap of tracks 2 through 4, except in cases where the final track is sectional like DK Spaceport. This wouldn't be an issue if those transitional roads were more fun to drive on, but just look at the mini-maps here. It's like 90% just driving straight with nothing to do except run the item roulette over and over. And this unfortunately also applies to the game's Knockout mode. As a quick reminder, the way that Knockout mode works is that you join a lobby and select one of the game's 8 rallies. Once the rally starts, you're essentially speedrunning across the map through 6 of the game's courses, with the bottom 4 at the end of each race getting eliminated. Unlike Grand Prix mode though, Knockout Tour basically has you just briefly visit each track and drive straight through before making your way to the next one. And this means that the amount of time we spend on each track is even shorter than in Grand Prix mode. Again, just look at the mini-maps here and how little time is spent doing anything other than driving straight. The consequence is that item luck here is a huge factor in the outcome of a race, which sucks because the entire point of Knockout is that one bad race will get you eliminated from the lobby.
Do it! They're not giving me anything
Nope,
good to catch
just,
up with.
You got it.
You know, when it's this many human players and the CPUs are really playing their best game, and if you just don't get the right items, it's really difficult.
Now, granted, I've only seen 2 cups and 2 rallies. I'm just saying, that's a lot of time that you're expected to be doing nothing but praying for good luck. And to be clear, like I said, I really like the idea behind Knockout Tour. I just wish that the open world parts of each rally were as interesting to drive as the tracks themselves, because at this point it kind of feels like straight up versus races are going to be the way to go. But even those have a minor issue, which is the point spread, which might not seem like that big of a deal, but hear me out. In Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, here's how the points are distributed in a 12-person lobby online. Basically, no matter where you are in a race, there's always a reason to try and make a sick play at the end, because being successful will guarantee some additional points. And in competitive Mario Kart, the difference between a win and a loss often comes down to just a handful of points. But in Mario Kart World's 24-person lobbies, the distribution looks like this. So let me get this straight. If I'm in 15th place at the end of a race, I could gain 2 additional spots and see no benefit whatsoever? I mean, this is just weird, right? And this is just pure speculation on my part, but if I had to guess, I would say the reason why the point spread was designed this way is that Nintendo is really banking on Knockout Tour being the go-to way that people race against each other online, since in that mode your placement is literally the only thing that matters. But they still needed to design a point spread for the game's more traditional Grand Prix races where you're going up against computer-controlled characters. Most Mario Kart games have this rival system where some CPUs have an advantage over others, so that even if you're doing really well in a cup, you're never usually pulling too far ahead of second place. But if they were to implement an 8 Deluxe style point spread, something like first place gets 24, second place gets 23, etc., you could run into a situation where getting a bad spot in one race means your cup is over. So my guess is that the point spread they went with allows for the desired 24 racers on every track, while still allowing for newer players to not feel so overwhelmed by a bit of bad luck. The only problem is that if it does turn out that Knockout Tour ends up being not that fun to play online, 24-person lobbies in normal races would also be completely unviable for competitive play. But let me just take a quick step back here, because I don't want to dwell on that point for a long time, since obviously the game hasn't released yet, and we don't know what the final product is going to look like. It may be the case, for example, that the game releases with 200cc, and that high-speed, high-energy races make everything that I've said above completely moot. So again, don't get me wrong, I'm not prejudging the game here, since I think it has the potential to kill just as much of my life as Mario Kart 8 Deluxe did. I'm just saying that as of right now, I'm a little nervous.